Hello, my friends, and welcome to End Times Analysis. I'm Pastor Jeff, and we're going to continue our discussion on Ezekiel 38. So, get yourself a cup of coffee, have a seat, and let's reason together. We are looking now at Ezekiel 38, 7 and 9. Magog's armies come into the land of Israel. It says, "Prepare yourself and be ready, you and all your companies that are gathered about you, and be a guard for them. After many days you will be visited in the latter years. You will come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many peoples on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. Not This is something we're going to get to, but I just want to stop right here because it's so important. Not at peace, but safely. We are going to discuss that and all the other ones, but that word means so much. You will ascend. You will ascend, coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud. You and all your troops and many peoples with you. We're going back. Prepare yourself and be ready, you and all your companies that are gathered about you, and be a guard for them. What is this saying? Well, if you believe that Magog is Russia, and you've ever been in the military, or ever been around a military base, or ever seen military get ready for an exercise or to go overseas to fight or to defend our nation, you understand this just doesn't happen. You don't gather a bunch of people, you don't hand them weapons and then send them to the front, though that has been done in history, and see a lot of good things happen. So prepare yourself. For many years, for almost as long as Russia has been Russia, it has had a very large standing army. In the beginning, Russia became Orthodox. It saw its father in the faith, Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, fall to the Ottoman Turks. After, then it saw itself be conquered for about 300 years by the Mongols. Then Ivan the Terrible came up, helped free them. How much freedom you got under Ivan the Terrible, that is to be discussed. But the Russians knew that they were going to have large standing armies in order to protect themselves. They were invaded by the Teutonic Knights, by the Swedes, by Napoleon. The Russians got this idea of the Russian steamroller. There is not that many defensible positions, especially from the eastern part of Russia. What they did was they allowed armies to come in. They were swallowed up just by the size of the nation. And then with a ever increasing amount of manpower, the Russian steamroller, they would sooner or later overcome their enemies. They were the ones who pulled Napoleon in, and by just destroying everything around them, destroying their own cities, pulling them in, making them go farther and farther into Russia, depending more and more on their supply lines, then they were able to cut off their supply and defeat the Grand Army. That was a way that was done for many years. World War One happened. Well, I should say the Russo-Japanese War, World War One, World War Two. All of these things happened, and Russia, even in the communist period, maintained a huge army. When Hitler came in, he never realized just how many men Russia had, how much losses they could sustain. They had an entire army east under General Zhukov waiting for Japan to invade. When they learned from their spy network in Japan that Japan wasn't going to invade, they were able to come east and then, along with American Lend-Lease, turn the tide. So Russia had this idea that in order to be safe, we must have large standing armies. Now, in the Gorbachev period, at the very end of the communist the communist period, this changed. The idea that we cannot afford having these large standing armies, having satellite nations depending on us. There were people in the satellite nations, especially East Germany and Hungary, the People's Republic of Hungary, that actually had a higher standard of living than people in Russia and the Soviet Union. So they realized we could not afford overseas possessions, overseas satellites, overseas even the allies. I would consider Cuba not really a satellite but an ally, and have large standing armies. Something had to give. So they started pulling out of Eastern Europe. They started limiting their aid to Vietnam and North Korea. The disappearance of the Soviet aid, many people think that was what triggered their famine. You see it now. Then all of a sudden, during the Boris Yeltsin period, the communism fell. The lowering of the flag of the Soviet Union, the rising of the flag of Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, all deciding not to keep the Soviet Union going, each forming the Commonwealth of Independent States. We see more and more the Russians were getting in a financial straits. And one of the easiest ways to get money is cut your military. The Russians thought they were a European nation. They consider themselves a European nation. They consider themselves going to be trading. And up until the Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian invasion, the Ukrainian war, they were their biggest trading partners were in Europe. They supplied gas, they supplied oil, gas, they supplied many things, food, fertilizer to Europe. And they actually did a lot more manufacturing than most people realize. Then all of a sudden that changed. It had to change. Russia had gotten a much smaller military. They were going into the Western model. A much more higher tech. Yes, they still had conscripts, but they were going much more volunteer, high tech, and they were going to have a much smaller army. And then all of a sudden, the Ukrainian special military operation, invasion, whatever you want to call it, happened. Something would have to happen in order for Ezekiel 38, 7 and 9 to come true. Because if you read 7 and 9, and I don't think we're going to get to all of it, we're going to probably have to stop it a little bit and move and come back tomorrow. In order for Russia to be this person, to be you and all your companies that are gathered about you, be a guard for them. They are going to be the principal force of this whole coalition that we talked about in 1 through 6. They were going to be the principal, and it looks like they were going to have large manpower standing armies. Now, what we have realized, unless something changes, it is very hard to have a smaller high-tech army and combined with a huge manpower army. Most nations cannot accomplish these things. Now, is Russia going to be the exception? If any nation could, with its natural resources, it could be this. Just don't see it happening. Just do not see it happening. Most nations will say, okay, we're going to have a large manpower, or we're going to have a very high tech. Even China, with the second largest economy in the world, is having trouble keeping a large standing manpower army, and because you got to pay the guys, you got to pay for the training, you got to pay. Think about the uniforms. You're going to make uniforms for millions of men. You're going to do that. Then you're going to have another thing of high tech. It's very hard. Not saying it's impossible. It can be done, I'm sure, but it's not really feasible for most countries to do. So now we're looking at a Russia that is once again, because remember, during the 90s, during the time of Boris Yeltsin, really during the last years of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, and even under the years of Vladimir Putin, the military has been cut. But because of the Ukraine special military operation, because of now all of a sudden, they are once again rebuilding their military, and it is a large manpower base standing army. And that standing army, yes, it is made a wall in much in the Ukraine. The Ukrainians are doing their offensive, and it really is reaching a wall. I know what we hear a lot, but if you really look at the maps, this is where the offensive is. This is where Russia is. It's really not moving very far. I'm not saying they're not getting a kilometer here, a couple kilometers there. It is really not moving. Why? Because Russia has a lot of men to spare going against the Ukraine. Now, will the Western powers get involved? Will something else? I don't know. But I know Russia is now realizing it is not necessarily a European power. The Europeans are not their friends. NATO is continuing to expand eastward. Now, if you are a defensive alliance, why are you expanding this way? If you are Russia, what are you thinking? Well, if this is an alliance and you always militarily expand in the direction of your enemies, how does NATO look at me? And if NATO looks at me this way, what am I going to do to keep myself defend to keep my nation whole? Because one of the things that Vladimir Putin believes is that NATO wants to do to Russia what they did to Yugoslavia, break it up into smaller, manageable bites. Because remember, Vladimir Putin was a member of the KGB. He was a member of the intelligence society. He understands the neocon and the neocon philosophy that's America, that we will never allow again another nation to rise up to challenge hegemony, being the sole superpower. Well, we're going to stop here because I don't want to continue what I wanted to get to 8 and 9, but we're just not going to make it. So, if you found this informative, if you liked it, if you enjoyed our time together, please hit the subscribe and the like button. So, for Pastor Jeff and the End Times Analysis, thank you for your time, and Maranatha.